is your host, Cain Stevens. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Cain Stevens Super Show. I'm your super host, once again, Cain Stevens, and we are back at it again. This is a weekly show, everybody. You all know by now because you've been listening, you've been tuning in, you've been telling me about all my guests, and I've got another super guest on my hand here. Well, really both hands, not just one hand, but on my hand. So he's a comedian. He's from the East Coast, I believe, and we're gonna get to know a little bit more about him here. So, with that being said, let's bring on my guest, Chris Robinson. Everybody.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you for coming on. So, what part of the East Coast are you living in right now?
So I'm down in Melbourne, Florida.
Okay.
So I'm kind of close to the Orlando area down here in Florida.
And so, have you lived there most of your life? Did you move there? What brought you to Florida?
So I originally was born in New York.
Okay.
And then was in New York till about middle school.
Yeah.
And then for high school, I came down to Florida, and I've been moved around a little bit, but mainly Florida since high school. So I've been here a long time.
Right on, man. And how long have you been doing comedy? You've been doing comedy for quite a while now, haven't you?
6 years. Yeah, I'm 6 years going on 7 now.
Did you start as an open micer like a lot of people?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I mean the only other option is you see sometimes people who are already famous for something else, like music or acting or something. Right. They jump into it without starting out as an open micer. Usually they suck at it because they never went through the process of being an open mic comic.
Did you go to like improv classes and all that stuff, or did you just go right out of the gate into open mics?
Well, weirdly, I started just showing up at open mics and doing it. Because my dad had actually done comedy years ago, and I got to see him do it. So I was like, I want to do that one day, but I was always too nervous. And then I went to an open mic and saw how much everybody sucked, and was like, oh, so you can be a complete amateur and just get up on stage and try this. So after that, I just started doing 5 minutes at a time.
Which a lot of them do. Isn't that shocking that people will just go up there and make a fool of themselves? Comedy's not easy. Like, I mean, I'm a musician and I've made a fool of myself plenty of times. But people, but I can't imagine, I was I'm probably not funny now, but I was a class clown. I at least had people laugh at me a lot. Were you a class clown when you were younger?
A little bit, yeah. But not to the point where I was like disruptive. So I wasn't really known for it, but I made jokes with the people around me.
You weren't like roasting everybody. You weren't like the bully in the movies that was like roasting everybody and just
no, definitely not.
I was kind of like a man of the people, like I always stood up for the kids that got made fun of. I was kind of a fat kid. So it was to me, it was like, I'm going to go ahead and roast the bullies and make them feel like crap. And then when that didn't happen, it was usually like, well, they're probably punching me in the face or something like that.
Yeah, it was the same thing. For me, being funny was more of a survival mechanism.
Yeah. Well, that's what you do, right? I mean, that's what people who are clowns kind of do. I mean, are you is comedy kind of your life? I mean, do you have like a regular job too? What do you do?
Yeah, so I sell health insurance. And I work for this company called One Insurance, but I'm lucky because my parents own it.
Yeah.
So I work for my parents, which gives me a lot of flexibility to do comedy. So that's been helpful.
Is insurance
outside
is insurance a funny game to be in or not really?
No, not really. which is why it's weird. But the funny thing is that I used to like hate selling health insurance. And now that I do comedy and I have some outlet to have fun and do other things, I actually enjoy the insurance part more because I also can do comedy.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have something to fall back on, especially if it's kind of like a family thing, a family business or something. So you said your dad did comedy years ago. I mean, he kind of just do the same thing was he kind of like a working man who did comedy? Was he always pretty funny?
Yeah, so I think that's a part of where I get the comedy thing from. Like both of my mom's family and my dad's family and my stepmom's family, they're all like big laughers.
Right.
Everybody gets together in a group, and the goal is to make everybody laugh. It's kind of what everybody does when they hang out. So my dad is always a really funny person, and he'd been selling health insurance for, at this point, he's done health insurance for, I guess, 30 years at this point. And when we were in New York, it was like a bucket list thing for him. He wanted to try stand up. He always thought he'd be funny, and he worked on it for like a year and recorded a special at the end of the year. So he put out an hour performance. The thing sucks was years ago our house burned down,
Okay.
so no copy of that performance exists. So it's just gone forever.
Has he ever
But
thought about putting it together again? Like getting back up there for that hour,
uh,
rehashing it?
I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he could. But the other thing that's weird about it is now you could probably still do it. It would be a little dated now because people are more sensitive now than they were back then.
Yeah.
So some of the stuff he was saying on stage, you'd have to rewrite it, move some stuff around, just because people are just more sensitive now.
Right. Well, how hard is it for you? Because comedians can get away with it in some ways, right? Like, all of our famous, our favorite comedians who are famous, a lot of them will take that chance and they'll say things
Mm,
and they'll get away with it because they're comedians. But there's always some a-hole in the crowd that can't stand it, right? I witnessed it at the Fully Loaded tour. I
mm,
went there here in Lincoln, and we had a blast. Like, it was probably one of the best, aside from like the Smashing Pumpkins concert that I went to years ago. It's
mm.
probably the best show I've ever been. But the girl next to us was just so lame. She didn't get the joke. She hated it. You could tell she's probably part of the cancel culture, and she was
Yeah,
probably dialing up all of them as soon as she left. I can't believe they talked about kids with Down syndrome and all this. It's comedy. We're
yeah,
going there to laugh, right?
yeah. No, I mean, people are. What I didn't realize was is one of the dangerous things about being a comic in Florida is the audiences in Florida aren't sensitive.
Yeah.
So when I got a show in LA in May. So when I go out to LA, I have to adjust because the audience there is going to be way more sensitive than the audiences are in Florida. When I did the Comedy Cellar in New York. When I went up to New York, within the first like 30 seconds of being on stage, I went, "Oh, I'm going to have to dial this back." Because like the first couple of jokes, people were like they laughed, but you could tell they were uncomfortable. And I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to dial. Like I can't just get on stage like I can in Florida and just let it fly. You got to
Right.
kind of be careful."
Absolutely. Well,
So
that makes sense. Yeah, it's probably even, have you done any in the Midwest yet? The Midwest is probably a different
I've,
animal too.
I've done the Midwest. The Midwest is kind of in between. It's a
Yeah.
little bit in between, where like they're not as like, "Oh my God, you can't say this or that," like a New York or an LA crowd is. But they're also not as anything goes as Florida.
Yeah.
It's a little bit in the middle.
We're kind of like a hard people here, we're like what you would expect like the northerners in Game of Thrones to be, like we hide
Yeah.
our you know we do all this type of stuff. But then there's people like me, like the sensitive nice guy, and I just blurt it all out, and then everyone looks at me like I'm a freak. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of a happy medium, and then there isn't. So
Yeah.
have you ever been to Nebraska before? Do you know much about Nebraska?
No, I don't know much about Nebraska. That's one of those
You
places
think we're
where
horses and Indians and cowboys and all that stuff, or do you think we've evolved over the years?
I assume you guys have evolved over the years, but to be honest, I think the only thing I know about Nebraska is from like hunting shows.
Right.
So yes, it looks like it
I,
look in my brain Nebraska's like prairie and like just empty dirt roads.
well, I love talking to people on the coast about Nebraska and what they think of it because I assume everyone thinks we're wearing prairie bonnets and we've got
Yes.
wagons and all.
Yeah.
I swear we're civilized people overall, at least some of us. But we do have the plains here. It's very
Yeah.
boring. It's drive, flyover territory or drive through type
Mhm.
stuff. We do have some good comedy here. Lincoln, where I'm at, It's pretty good. We have Omaha, and Omaha is, a big metro, and they have a ton of comedy out there. So I mean, if you ever get through, man, I'd love to come see you. I mean, there's a pretty good comedy
All
scene.
right.
Yeah. I had a another comedian on a while back named Doc Peterson from here, and I know he puts on different shows throughout, and they seem to do pretty well, man. But the Funny Bones at Omaha, I know all the famous comedians come there. Though obviously we
Mhm.
have big arenas that people do, but
Yeah.
have you done any massive shows like big arenas and stuff yet?
I've done one theater show and like a theater that has like probably seats 800, but that's about the biggest I've done so far.
Yeah. Is it harder to kind of find your timing a lot? Because I listen to a lot of comedy podcasts, and they
Mhm.
talk about when you're in a bigger venue, it's harder to find your timing because the laughs are a little different and everything. So I can only imagine like in a massive place
Mhm.
where you've got, say 30,000 people or more. It's probably
Yeah.
hard to dial that in even with the monitors and everything.
Well, it's what well I've never done 30,000. That's crazy. But even in like a 800 to 1,000 person theater, it's when you're in a small room where everybody's packed tight, you tell a joke and it seems like it reaches the people all at the same time. Everybody reacts all at the same time. Everything happens all at the same time. For some reason, because I mean, sound travels really fast. I don't know why it would get to the front of the room before it got to the back of the room. But in a large room like that, the laughter almost happens in a wave. Where
Right.
like the people that are right up front usually get the joke faster because they're dialed in, they're closer, they can see your facial expressions, they can, they're closer to you. And
Yeah.
then the laugh sort of runs to the back of the room really, really fast. And then all of a sudden the whole room's laughing. Then you got to wait for that to die down. So what I've learned is, and Devin Siebold's a really great comic from down here that does a bunch of theaters. He's with the Board Teachers Tour,
Mhm.
and he was like, because I had him on my podcast, and he was just talking about you have to slow down. You have to slow down and wait for you wait for the laughter. You wait until you hear laughter at the back of the room. Then everybody's gotten the joke. Then you move on to the next joke.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, well, let's talk about bombing a little bit. I mean, all comedians dread it. Everyone likes to talk about it. Some comedians love watching other comedians bomb. I mean,
All comedians like watching other comedians bomb. It's the best part of our job.
it's got to be funny to you guys because you've all been through it, I'm sure. I mean, jokes just don't hit with certain people. What's
Yeah.
bombing like for you?
Um, the funny thing is I haven't had a good like bombing in a while because what I've focused on is like crowd work,
Yeah,
where if your material's not really working, you just start having a conversation with the audience and find funny points there, and that can help you dig yourself out of a hole. And I've been in some holes, but I've been able to dig myself out. But I've also had those rare occasions where, I mean, I remember one time I'm trying to remember, it was a couple years ago, but I did a show where I booked myself. I was booking my own show and I booked myself to close. I did the first two jokes, and just by their reaction of the first two jokes, I knew I was going to bomb. And I had probably 29 minutes and 30 seconds left to go.
man.
And I literally bombed. Like, imagine performing for a half hour in front of a room of people that you could just tell hated your guts for the entire half an hour.
I can
It,
imagine because it happened to me as a musician. Quite a bit, and then you have to like face them the whole night. Like,
yeah,
you try to get through the first set and you could tell they hate you. They want some
yeah,
band playing garbage and you're playing like Leonard Skinner and stuff.
yeah,
And, and you could tell they just want to lynch you by the end of it. So
yeah,
you do, right? You just
yeah.
get paid.
Or as a musician, do you ever get that awkward thing of like after the show and you have a bad set where like someone from the audience walks up to you and is like, you just got to keep trying. You got to keep, you got to keep, just keep at it. One day it'll work.
Usually we're so inebriated by that time, it really it doesn't matter. That was my former self. I used to gig a lot, I used to play a lot in the region.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
now I don't. I had heart problems a few years ago, so now I
Mhm.
dialed it back to being a studio musician and
Mhm.
all that. I love the fact that you said you're a podcaster as well. I want to talk about that too.
Mhm.
Talk about your show a little bit and everything. But I just, getting back to bombing a little bit, it's just so fascinating to me because, like I would say the biggest bomb for me was I was playing a show in a small town, doing the small town circuit, and my guitar, this was before I had strap locks, my guitar fell completely off my body, fell straight down, bong, right on the floor. And I'm the singer, so I'm up front and the rhythm player, so it's
Yeah.
obvious. And all I could say to the crowd was, "I guess we're experiencing technical difficulties."
Did they laugh at least?
They did. They laughed. They were
Okay.
in shock of how ridiculous it was, and it was like a loud boom as it happened. But man, I literally wanted to throw myself in front of a bus when that happened, and then I had to.
Did anything break? Were you able to just pick it up and keep going?
I picked it up and kept going. Well, I mean, it obviously needed to retuned, but
Yeah.
aside from that, we were probably terrible anyway, so it probably
Yeah.
wasn't that different from the original sound. But
That's
that was
pretty
my
funny.
biggest bomb. I would say so. I mean, if you are a musician, get those strap locks, kids. It's a
Yeah.
lifesaver. If you're a live musician, it's an absolute must. So,
I did a show was that 2 weeks ago in Daytona for Bike Week.
mhm,
And it was such a bad. This wasn't a bombing because again, I was able to talk to the audience and dig myself out of the hole,
yeah,
but it could have been a bombing easily. It was during Bike Week, and it was in one of those bars that used to be a garage, so it's got garage doors.
yep.
So for whatever reason, they had a comedy show during Bike Week and left the doors open.
Oh no.
So the whole time the comedy show's happening, Harleys are riding by the dozens. And the audience can't hear a damn thing. And we're yelling over. So finally, like halfway through the show, they put the garage doors down.
Yeah,
So after all of that, I'm on stage and I'm about halfway through my set, and the wireless microphone just dies in my hand.
man.
So
That's
now I'm just up there with no microphone. So I literally did like a Shakespeare style, just standing on the front edge of the stage yelling so that everyone can hear me while they snatched the microphone out of my hand and took it to the back and put batteries in it and then brought it back out, which was probably only like, I don't know, 45 seconds to a minute, but it felt like forever.
like an
But
angry lecture, like you're standing up there
yeah,
like Hitler screaming at every.
yeah. Because I had to do it loud enough for everybody in the room to hear me. And I'm just sitting up, I'm standing on this weird stage in a bar. It was just weird.
I can only
I don't know.
imagine with all the Harleys and stuff too. Like, were they a good crowd? I mean, some of those bikers used to scare the hell out of me, even at like rock shows and stuff. Do they scare you?
No, they were cool. Yeah, they were cool. But it's in one of the. I think for Bike Week, it really depends on what place you show up to. This
Yeah,
was like a pretty cool, classy bar. This wasn't like a full on just biker dive bar kind of place.
right.
This was a nicer place. But no, I've actually volunteered Bike Week one year, and there are some interesting characters
Oh, they're the
that come out to Bike Week.
yeah, they're
It's
the absolute best. And then like the people who just want to be around it too are interesting people.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
those are the ones you really get like. But I was always like terrified I was gonna, there's always like a 6'8" guy, with like a
Yeah.
left, and you don't go up to him. One time I was pretty wasted, and I went up to this guy and I was trying to give everybody a hug, just like I don't know, just
Hmm.
like mess around. And I went to go reach over, like, hey, what? Why you put my arms out to hug this dude? This dude just shook his head, like, no, that ain't happening, bud. And I put this knife in his back pocket, and and I learned real quick, like, no, this, Leroy Brown over here isn't hugging today.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's talk about your podcast a little bit, man. So what's the podcast? Where can we listen to it? And what do you guys do on your podcast? What do you talk about?
So my podcast is called the Funny Style Podcast, right? And it's on, I mean, Spotify, Apple Music, um, all the places where you find, major podcast places. But what I did was so I've been doing comedy for 6 years. One of my co-hosts, his name is Rafiq. He's been doing comedy for about 11 years.
Okay.
And then I've got Brian and Matt. And those guys have both been doing comedy for a little less than 2 years, like a year and a half.
Yeah.
So what we do is we kind of have every week we have a conversation about how our careers are going, what's going on kind of in the stand-up world. We talk about, who dropped a special, who got a TV show, that sort of thing. And then what we also do, we spend a lot of time interviewing touring headliner comics.
Nice.
So our podcast is literally for anyone who loves stand-up comedy, anyone who thinks they want to try it, I mean, the main group for that it's for is someone who wants to try comedy or someone who is doing comedy and they're relatively new. I mean, we're at 75 episodes now. So I mean, if you go back to episode 1 and just start from the beginning, it will walk you through how to become a working comic. That's that's what our podcast is designed around.
And that's awesome. And I personally love comedy. I mean, I not just comedy, but comedy podcasts. Like I listen to them all
Mm-hmm.
week. I have my favorite comics. They might be not be what everybody else is. I like
Mm-hmm.
Tom Segura. I like Bert
Yeah,
Kreischer.
he's great. Yeah.
All those guys. I think what we like is like the most. I don't what we consider to be the most relatable. And and it doesn't matter what color they are. It doesn't matter what
Mm-hmm.
nationality. It's just if they're relatable is what's best to me. We just watched the what is the Steve Trevino one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys talked about that. And this guy is he's from San Antonio, but he's just super relatable, man. Like everything he
Mm-hmm.
said, it's like he was for lack of better term, it's like he was a Hispanic Bert Kreischer, really. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So I loved it. The thing about like going to the Fully Loaded tour, which was a hell of a tour, man. I mean, like I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
did you have any of that pass through you guys's?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember seeing that. Yeah.
I mean, it was a massive, put on by Bert Kreischer, but a massive fest. I mean, he had a mascot of himself running around the whole
Yeah.
time. I mean, it was something like, I mean, they had a DJ in
Mm-hmm.
between, they had everything, like so many great comics. It just left me with like the best feeling I've ever had leaving a place, man. Like I rarely leave with a smile on my face because I'm usually pissed off, like somebody spilled nachos on my leg or this person stepped on my new, my new Air Force One. But man, it made me feel fantastic. But so you're getting all these headliners and all these people on there. I mean, are the guys on your show? I mean, are they all pretty relatable overall? Or are they like what type of comics would you say you and your crew
um, all pretty relatable.
are?
So like I mean, like I think two of the guys like have kids, so they, also talk about having their kids and, raising families, that sort of thing. And then me and Rafiq, we don't have kids. I'm married. Rafiq is single, I think. So we're all kind of in different places.
Yeah,
But nobody's like a real like nasty shot comic or anything like that. Yeah,
right.
we've got a few in our area, but those guys aren't on the podcast usually.
So are you guys
We bring them on for fun, but
clean comics? Or are you guys all? I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
no.
Like dirty.
Uh, no, I mean, like I can work clean, because one of the things that happens as a comic, and I'm sure this happens as a musician too, if you can work clean, you can get a lot more work.
Right.
So as comics, you very quickly learn, oh, funny enough, dude, church shows pay some of the most money for
Right.
comics because there aren't that many comics that can do clean enough to perform for a church.
Yeah.
Every time I've performed for a church, I've gotten more from the church than comedy clubs give you.
And
You
that's
know?
they're just looking for somebody to make them laugh. The church is pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So I
apologize.
mean,
Dog's going nuts. My one of
yeah.
my co-hosts is Teddy the Cockapoo, and he tends to
Oh yeah.
be a pretty yippy dog when he hears. He's like, this dog is basically just scared to death. Like everything completely frightens him all the time. So I apologize.
No, it's fun.
So I mean, what are your favorite comedians? Like I love to talk to people. Like if I thought about a clean comedian myself, I mean, I loved Sinbad when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would say he's a pretty clean comedian, right?
Yeah. Sinbad was clean.
Yeah, and he
And
was
he was
a
doing
comedian, dude. I mean, he was so by bad, I mean good. I mean, this guy used
yeah.
to tear it down.
Yeah.
But I mean, I liked all the dirty stuff. I mean, I obviously loved Eddie Murphy. I loved
Mm-hmm.
all these guys. I mean, I loved late. I got to see later George Carlin, all that. I
Mm-hmm.
would watch Gallagher.
Yeah.
I would, I just watched it all as a kid. Like, I mean, these guys gave me like some of the best feelings of my life, man.
Well, it's funny that you say Gallagher because the funny thing about Gallagher was he would actually say some pretty profound material
oh yeah.
and then smash watermelons. So it confused people so much so that he became like a joke. But Gallagher actually wrote some real material also.
Oh, he was a
Yeah.
comedian. I mean, I can remember
Yeah.
one special in particular where he's jumping around on a trampoline, delivering jokes, and then he
Yeah.
gets down there. He does. People kind of put him in the carrot top type thing.
Hmm.
He's smashing watermelons. That's kind of like his gimmick. But I think it's hilarious. I mean, like, who comes up with this stuff? And he does deliver, really good jokes overall, and they are
Yeah.
pretty. But then you kind of look at it's really all about what you like. I mean, people want to call it a gimmick or whatever. People will call Larry the Cable Guy a gimmick, but I mean, it was a
Hmm.
gimmick that worked, right? I mean, the guy's
Yeah.
actually a pretty good comedian overall and can keep
Hmm.
it clean. So I mean, it's not for everybody, but it's for some.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say my you're not supposed to say this, but my favorite clean comic is Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
You can't really say nice things about Bill Cosby anymore. but but before we found out he was kind of a monster, he was he has actually have I collect vinyl comedy albums, like the old school comedy albums. And I always knew that Bill Cosby was like a very good storyteller. He's like a legendary storyteller.
Yeah, of course.
Then, after all this stuff came out about him, I was doing my regular record store running around, and I went to a record store where everything Bill Cosby was in the $1 record bin
Oh yeah.
because they were just trying to get all of his stuff out of their store. And I bought all of it.
I love that you
And
said that, man, because I did the same thing, but I did it at the thrift store. I found every
okay, yeah,
Bill Cosby album at the thrift store, and I grabbed it all because it's like, yes, he's a monster. Yes, we hate him for doing this, but man, he was such a funny
he was
guy
awesome.
and
Yeah.
such a great story to, and especially a guy like you who's honing into the craft. I mean,
Hmm.
study Bill Cosby, study Steve Martin,
Yeah.
all those guys, Robin Williams. I mean, those guys had set a precedent for comedy that
Yeah.
can't be changed.
And Bill Cosby, what's interesting about Bill Cosby that I have honestly not figured out how to do is he would take mundane, regular life stories and somehow make them funny.
Yeah,
Like, just go into the DMV and he'll make that story funny, you
absolutely.
know, which is so hard to do.
It was the faces. It was. I mean, obviously you get that with the vinyl, but like watching his old comedy special,
Yeah.
you probably can't see a lot of it now. But I'm not afraid to watch it. His facial expressions were
Yeah.
impeccable, and like he's
Hmm.
just a funny guy. It's just so bad that that in his regular life and the stuff he was doing on the side was like so far from you know uh,
Yeah.
Mr.
Who he
Hug.
was. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you saw, speaking of him making jokes, there was one of the news reports. They were like, there was a bunch of reporters that had cameras on him as he was coming into court,
Yeah,
and he did like some joking moves from like his old act, like coming into court as he's being charged with like heinous crimes. I
like
was
the
like, man,
yellow face as he goes in.
yeah. Yes, he was doing some like, it was, I
Uh,
was like, Bill is insane. Like, Bill Cosby is insane.
he is. Didn't they let him out? Like, isn't he out
Yeah,
because?
he's out now, I think. Yeah, he was trying to go on tour.
Oh wow.
And it's so funny, on my podcast we discussed it. We had like a half-hour long going back and forth argument, because
Yeah,
I was like, if Bill Cosby goes on tour, I'm going. I will be front row
right.
to see what the hell is Bill Cosby gonna say.
Yeah, I'm not
Like,
even gonna wear a costume. I'm going as myself. I'm going to
yeah.
dude, he would probably sell out. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, it's kind of like Louis C.K. Louis C.K. did some messed up stuff, right? But he's come back.
Mhm.
Like they thought he would never come back, and he's starting to really make his rounds. Like I mean,
Yeah.
he did some he did some stuff, but he's a funny guy, man.
Hey there, grooming gurus. We've got something wild for you today.
That's right, folks. Get ready to tame the untamed with products that redefine the beard game. Introducing the Elegant Sasquatch Grooming Company.
Elegant Sasquatch, that sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Well, grooming should be an adventure, my friend, and with these products, you'll embark on a journey to the grooming wilderness.
So, what makes the Elegant Sasquatch so unique?
It's all about taking your beard from beastly to beautifully wild. Picture this: you wake up and your beard looks like it just got back from a spa day. That's the magic of their high-end beard balms.
Spa day for the beard? Sign me up. And let's not forget their beard butters and oils. It's like giving your beard a tropical vacation. I'm talking about a beach party for your facial hair.
A beach party for the beard. This company's got the best marketing ever.
Oh, but we're not done yet, folks. The Elegant Sasquatch Grooming Company also has beard washes that make shower time a majestic experience.
Showering with Sasquatch, that sounds like a reality show.
It does, but seriously, listeners, if you want to sophisticate your outer beast, head over to elegantsasquatchco.etsy.com and use the code SUPERSHOW at checkout for an exclusive discount of 20% off.
You can also find them on Facebook and Instagram. Check them out, like them, and while you're at it, tell them the Super Show sent you.
Well, interesting about the two things about Louis C.K. Number one, I actually got super lucky and was able to go to like one of his first shows when he came back after the whole incident.
Yeah.
So we've got a club down here. It's in like the Sarasota, Florida area.
Okay.
It's called McCurdy's. And McCurdy's is one of these cool rooms where it's an independent club. It's not like one of the Funny Bones or one of the Improvs or anything. It's privately owned. It's owned by this guy named Les McCurdy. But they somehow managed to get like big acts to come down to Sarasota and do McCurdy's. It's a really nice theater, so I get it. So when Louis C.K. first came back, he wasn't able to do like the big arenas anymore. He was back in the comedy clubs. And I saw, like, I got a text alert from McCurdy saying, oh, Louis C.K. tickets going on sale at such and such time. They'll sell out quickly. And I knew they were going to sell out instantly. So actually, I was at work and I called my wife, who was at home at the time. And I was like, listen, do me a favor. I'm at work, but at 12 p.m., like lunchtime on the dot, get on this link and buy those tickets immediately. Right. And she did. And we got super lucky and we sat literal front row. Like I could have reached out and touched Louis C.K. from my seat. He was right there. And he's still as sharp as ever.
Yeah. Dude's kills it, man. I mean, like go back to any of those specials that he's had. And I mean, the guy is just a killer when it comes to being on stage. Like he's just, he can be shocking, funny, obviously. You know, the stuff he said, it's funny to hear him talk about, like, he's addressed the fact that, especially now that he, asked if he could, jerk off to somebody, with him there. And he addresses it and then tells people not to do it. I mean, that's hilarious. I guess he's owned.
So it's funny you say that. So that first, again, it's one of those things where people are going to buy those tickets just because out of curiosity, like, I got to see what this guy's going to say. Yeah. He comes out and he does this. It was so brilliant the way he did it. Is he steps out on stage and everybody's cheering and he waits for it to come down to silence. And he takes like a big sigh and he goes, so how's your guys' year been? And everybody, of course, laughs. Yeah. And then he goes, like, it's his very first thing was, well, I learned this year, do not jerk off in front of people, even if they say you can. Like, and like that was the first thing out of his mouth when the curtains opened. And I was like, that's the way that you respond to
that's what I was hoping for with the Chris Rock special. I was hoping he would address it right away, but he did the smart thing, right? He did the other thing. He made you sit through the whole special before he addressed it. But it was, I don't know. What'd you think of that, man? I'm going to be honest with you, and I like Chris Rock. I didn't think that was a very strong special overall. It was very political, and I'm okay with political, but I didn't dig it. I like Chris Rock. I was just, I felt myself like bored at times and then waiting for it to kick into, oh, hey, let's talk about Will Smith and let's cook Will Smith for a second.
Well, what's interesting about Chris Rock, and I feel horrible for him in that whole situation because, and I don't know, but if I'm Chris Rock, do I put my best material into this special knowing that people are only watching this for the Will Smith thing? I don't know if I do that. It seemed to me like for Chris Rock, this was kind of a throwaway special. Where it was like, clearly everybody's just here to hear me talk about Will Smith. Let me do some material up front to fill the time. And then the final quarter of the special is just going to be me addressing the situation. Well, then also, where I also feel bad for him, I don't know if this it seemed like he also took the high road where Will Smith is such a target rich environment right now with all the stuff that's been happening
Right.
with him and his wife and all that stuff. I was thinking Chris Rock was going to tear him completely apart.
Yeah.
And he didn't. He was gentle about it and then just moved on. So I feel like that special.
That's what I was waiting for, was him to, I mean, completely roast, him, roast Jada, roast everybody, talk about all the allegations of, possibly like dudes and Will Smith together.
Yeah. I thought he was going to do all of that.
I did too, man. He kind of took a man's road on it though. Like, hey, I took a slap from a big guy, and I smiled and I got through it, and he kind of took the man's road on it. So I don't disrespect him for that necessarily. Yeah. Man, your insight as a comedian really came out because you changed my mind on it. I think you're absolutely right. I think he didn't put his best material forward because why? Right? You're absolutely right. It's a throwaway to that when people just want to hear that story. So man, I just that's a thought that had never even crossed my mind.
Yeah, I wonder if he's saving all of his best stuff for the next special, where now it's audiences are just coming with an open mind rather than just waiting to hear about Will Smith.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how hard is it? I mean, I love asking comedians when I talk to them, how hard is it to put together an hour special? It's got to be pretty hard, right?
It's very hard. It's so I put out my first hour 2 years ago, and it's called the 60/40 Rules. It's produced by this company called Comedy Dynamics. And it's everywhere you find your music. It's on Tidal, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Music, all the places. But ever since then, I mean, it took me 3 years to write my first hour.
Yeah.
And after that, I got a big head and was like, I'm going to follow the Louis C.K. principle. Louis C.K. does a new hour every year. Yeah. So he writes for 6 months, tours and kind of works the kinks out for 6 months, and then records and then starts that whole process over again. And I was like, I'm going to put out a new special every year. And it's been 2 years going on 3 now since I did the first one. And it's like, it's so hard. It's so much, because the thing is, the first special you write kind of fast just because you have, let me take all of the funniest things that's ever happened to me in my entire life and put it all together in an act. Right. Well, once you've burned that, now you got to figure out new things to talk about and new subjects and new opinions to have, So it either that or you're telling kind of hacky jokes,
And that can be hard, right? I mean, that's the thing people don't want to get sucked into because other comedians will call you out. I mean, in case of point would be, Carlos Mencia, as funny as he was. And he is funny. I don't care what anybody says. Go back and watch Mind and Mencia, all that stuff. The dude is funny. His delivery is funny. But man, Joe Rogan cooked him on all that, dude. It was wild.
I'll tell you the saddest thing about Carlos Mencia. So he was at the Orlando Improv recently, and he does some shows down here in Florida, like quite a bit. And I got to kind of sit backstage and watch him at the Orlando Improv. He's still hilarious.
Yeah,
he's a murderer on stage. And I think what happened to him, which is really unfortunate, and I get why Joe Rogan was so pissed. But I also think that he was a victim of like the pressure, because people forget when Mind of Mencia came out, Carlos Mencia was the hottest comedian in the world. I mean, obviously there's of course Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle and those guys, but at that specific moment, I mean, they were throwing money at him from all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think what happened was, like, a lot of people don't know that, like, Chris Rock has writers. Kevin Hart has writers. They all use a team of people to help them keep up with the demand of having to put out a lot of stuff every year. I think Carlos Mencia fell victim to the fact that he's got this humongous show that's so popular, and he was just running out of ideas. And I think in a panic, he just started stealing other people's ideas because he couldn't come up with anything else. I think the same thing happened to Amy Schumer. I don't know if you've seen there's this video montage that someone made on YouTube of Amy Schumer telling a joke, and then the comedian she stole the joke from is played doing the bit right after you see her do the bit. And it's like, here's Amy Schumer in 2004. And then it goes to like, here's Patrice O'Neal doing that exact same bit in 2001. And then it's like, here's Amy Schumer in 2010. Here's Bill Burr doing that exact material in 2002. It's brutal when you watch those videos. It's like, oh, you just stole from people. So I think those comics that get big, because you remember, same thing like Carlos Mencia, Amy Schumer had her own show, and then they're throwing her in movies, and they were doing all this stuff. And I think those people don't sit down and do the work to make sure that they're writing enough and they're coming up with enough material to keep up with the demand of how famous they are.
Well, and what's interesting with her is the take that she goes with is not that people are trying to, cancel some of her work because she stole their work, but she's talking about, oh, they're after me because of the way I look, right? And so she kind of takes this other side, but it's like, no, nobody cares if you're chubby or whatever. Yeah. Like, nobody has a problem with the way you look. They had a problem with the fact that you're absolutely right. You literally stole somebody else's work.
Yeah. So I mean, how do you? Yeah, it's the looks thing is such a goofy thing because, again, comedy is one of the few areas where you being really, really attractive actually almost hurts you.
Yeah.
People like Matt Rife, who's Brandon Schwab, who's like young ripped comedian.
It's like
it's actually harder on them,
right? And all that. I mean, the dude is like massive.
Yeah. So now I understand. Also, it's very different because I'm not a woman, so I don't know what it's like being a female comic. But no, so many dude, Louis Anderson was like a famous, super successful comic. When it comes to comedy, people don't really care what you look like.
Yeah.
It's, are you funny? And did you actually write this material?
Right.
And she didn't write a lot of that material.
No, she didn't. And that's the thing is you made a great comparison because she was as big as Mencia at one point. I mean, she was everywhere and all of a sudden she's nowhere.
They almost gave her the Barbie movie. Did you know that?
Yeah, I read that the other day.
She was about to be cast for the freaking Barbie movie. Wow. So clearly nobody cared what you look like.
Right.
Because how is it that her and Margot Robbie were on the same sheet of paper to get the same role? It doesn't make it clearly looks.
Yeah. No, not close. And that's nothing against them. I mean, I think her as I think she's actually a pretty attractive, lady.
Yeah.
I dig it, man. I mean, it's more. I hate to say this, is more obtainable than Margot Robbie is for me.
Yeah.
So I look at Amy Schumer, I'm like, there's an obtainable chick, But then I look at Margot, and I'm like, that not even on any platform would I ever have a chance with Margot Robbie, right? Not that I have a chance with because I would, and I'm married, so.
But I also wonder if this happened to Amy Schumer also, because if you listen to I don't know if you've ever heard of Opie and Anthony.
Yeah, I
was a famous radio chef. Okay, so all those years ago on the Opie and Anthony show, Amy Schumer came on a few times, and the whole thing was that how hot she was for a comic,
right?
Because most people don't think of female comedians as someone who's super attractive.
Yeah.
So they were like, "Oh, she's hot, like for a comic at least." Blah blah blah. And that was like the whole buzz around her. But then you have people like Sarah Silverman, Whitney Cummings.
Yeah.
There's a whole new crop. Like for whatever reason, comedy those two people have been doing it a long time. But in the last like 10 years, somehow comedy has become cool enough to where like hot women are also starting to do it. So there's this new wave of like gorgeous female comedians coming out, all the time now. And I wonder if that's
like model like. I mean,
yes,
flat out stunning, man. You're absolutely right. And it's like you get so lost in just looking at them, and they're funny too. It's like, oh my gosh, this lady is like 1,000 times more attractive now because
yeah. So I mean, maybe that's the pressure that Amy Schumer's feeling, because there's all of a sudden comedy is something that like hot women are interested in doing, which it definitely wasn't that before. So I mean, maybe that's where that pressure is coming from. But no, nobody's not mad at her looks. They were just mad that, I mean, those videos were brutal. It would be her doing the joke, and then immediately after, word for word, the person who originally busted their ass and wrote that material performing the material and performing it better than she was performing it. At least when Carlos Mencia stole something, he at least gave it justice on stage.
Yeah, he did it.
She would say, yeah, he would make it, because I think there was some documentary that he was interviewed in, and he wouldn't necessarily just steal the joke. He would steal the premise, but then he would turn the characters Mexican and make like figure out, like, you know, if you're eating pizza, now they're eating tacos, and if you're, you know, I don't know, driving a Mercedes, now he makes it you're driving a El Camino lowrider, or so. Like he would turn it into, you know, his thing, but it was still, the premise was stolen. Amy Schumer was just doing word for word jokes.
That's so great.
It was brutal.
So you're on the East. So did you grow up? I mean, I don't know how I don't know how old you are, but were you able to listen to like Opie and Anthony and Howard Stern and that when you were younger?
No, not really. So I'm 32.
Okay.
So, but what happened was, and this is, so my favorite comedian of all time is Patrice O'Neal.
Yeah,
he's like it's weird. It's almost like Patrice O'Neal's my mentor, even though I never met the man. because of Opie and Anthony, there's so much. There's a someone on Spotify where I think it's literally called Patrice O'Neal Archive. I think on Spotify, someone took every single appearance Patrice O'Neal ever had on the Opie and Anthony show and made a Spotify channel out of it.
Oh, for real, dude! I'm checking that out as soon as I get off it.
Yes, yeah. And it is. I mean, there's 145 like episodes that include him. And I mean, what's interesting to me is, had Patrice O'Neal not passed away so young, what his podcast would be today.
Oh man.
Like,
it'll be massive. I mean, think of all the pull he had just from being on Opie and Anthony and everything. I mean, he would have easily one of the best, if not the best, comedy podcasts out there. I mean, no.
Yeah. I think he would be right up there with Joe Rogan. I mean, he was one of the funniest people ever on the radio. I mean, there's just hours and hours of hilarious. I found this compilation because as a comic, I'm on the road. On a regular basis, I'm in my car for hours by myself, just gigging. You know, so as a musician, I'm sure you know, you're just riding around,
absolutely,
going from gig to gig hours. So I found a YouTube. Somebody made a compilation on YouTube of clips, and I found a way to download the audio, just the audio from a YouTube video. So I download this audio. Somebody took Opie and Anthony and Patrice talking about movies, and they took every single time they talked about a movie and put it all in a compilation, so you can listen to them just talking about movies. It's 11 hours long. It's 11 hours long.
That's time for that editing. I mean, you do a podcast. I mean, I edit for other shows, and I'm constantly sitting in front of a screen editing something, and it's like, bro, to put together something like that would be like outrageous. All of your time, you'd have to be obsessed.
Yeah. But like, if you're a person who likes movies, if you just look up again on YouTube, Patrice O'Neal talks about movies, it's 11 hours long, and you will piss your pants for 11 hours. Like, that dude was just amazing.
Man, I loved Opie and Anthony so much. I love listening to old Howard Stern, but I feel like when these guys came out, they did something different. And I love that everyone else was afraid of Howard Stern, right?
Yeah.
But these guys weren't. These guys went right at him. They were in the same studio as him, and they had it with his antics, and they just went straight at him, man. Like, the only one to ever really go at Howard Stern hard. And but man, it's like the saddest story in all of radio too. Like, then hate each other. Like, I listen to the Opie podcast, and I love, like, when he talks about the fallout of everything that happened with And it's just so sad, man, because they were just so great. Like if they would get back together somehow and learn to like each other again, they would have the best podcast out there. I mean,
Yeah.
the best show anywhere.
I'm sure you probably know this. So after they split up, Opie was then on with Jim Norton.
Yep.
And they did like a radio show for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Again, if you go on YouTube, there was an episode where everything kind of came to a head, where Jim Norton and Opie just had like a knockout, drag out argument on radio, and it was so brutally, because it wasn't like they were yelling and cursing at each other. They were just quiet and angry and mean. It was just two guys that were fed up with each other. And do you know Esther Koo?
No, I don't.
The comedian Esther Koo. So Esther Koo is a really funny comic. She's down here. She's in between. I think she's in between New York and Miami, but I know her from South Florida because I'm down here in Florida.
Yeah.
Esther Koo happened to be the guest that day and was in studio as they were arguing. And if you listen to the show, you can hear her, like her mic, they're arguing, having this like end of career argument with each other. And every like 15 minutes, you forget that she was there. Yeah. And then every 15 minutes she'd be like, guys, can we move on to the topics? And they would just keep arguing. It was so brutal. And when I did a show with her in Miami, I've done a few shows with her down in Miami. And one time I was like, I gotta ask you, what the hell was that like being in that room? Right. As these two like huge radio guys just decided, you know what? I know this lady's here, she's a guest, but screw it. We're about to just hash everything out on air for the next. I mean, they argued for like an hour and a half. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
And they probably got massive ratings. I mean, people love when it falls apart. So they all saw the writing on the wall. I know there was one argument I was watching. I think Anthony was still there, and they're arguing over yogurt and how and how Opie eats his yogurt, and it turned into horrible. I mean, like just attacking each other. It's like, man, you almost like the train wreck as it ends going apart.
But what also makes that so funny is a big part of the Opie and Anthony show was them trashing other radio shows as they collapse.
Exactly.
So it was just funny to then turn around and watch them as they live on air just collapsed,
Man, so. I miss their radio is obviously different now. I mean, we are radio now. What we're doing right now is current radio. But it's like there are some of the hanger-ons that are still out there. They're doing their talk shows. But I hear a lot of comedians talk about how when you do like the radio circuit, how lame it is, because you have
it's terrible.
Funny Frank and the Pitchfork in the morning or whatever.
Yeah,
they're cackling. I can't even imagine, man.
And they're playing fart sounds, and they're playing like the cartoon like weep beep 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 bonk for people falling, like just like it's so brutal. And then they want you to tell some of your jokes like on like they want you to cleverly weave your material into the conversation. But it has to be like, kids driving to school at 8:00 in the morning clean. Right. And it's like, I don't really have that much material that's like not going to offend anybody. That's why it's hard for me to do like local radio shows and stuff. Cause it's like, if I start getting into the stuff that I talk about on stage, you guys are going to get complaints because
in the FCC,
I'm going to offend somebody out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, podcast. So great, man. It's so awesome to be able to talk to a fellow podcaster and a comedian like yourself. To me, it's refreshing. I've been hitting like the medium circuit pretty hard. And by medium, I mean like spirit mediums and all that. Like I did like, I did like 6 or 7 in a row for whatever reason and wondered why. And then I went and looked back at my ad and I literally asked for a spirit medium. How could I be shocked when that's like all but it's like it's so wild getting some of these people because I've been told everything from I died in 1930 to a guy putting a snake in my shirt in New Orleans. I get all this stuff, and I'm the type of person, because this used to be a paranormal podcast, I believe everybody unless they give me a reason not to, right? I mean, unless they come out as completely nutty. But I mean, I haven't had any of that. I mean, do you buy into that type of spirituality and stuff. I mean, I want to get a little weirder with you now, if you
Mhm.
don't mind. Let's get strange together. All
Yeah.
right. What do you think about all that? Do you believe in mediums and spirits and all that?
The funny thing is, yes and no. I believe in the spirits. I don't believe in the mediums, which is maybe unfair. uh, I don't know that I believe that. But I don't know if this makes any logical sense, because the reason why I believe in that sort of thing now and I didn't in the past is because I've had a couple of very specific experiences of my own.
Right.
Right.
With
So I. Mhm.
with ghosts and hauntings? Is that the
Well,
type?
with again, I don't know. So my thing is it's either a supernatural world exists, or our subconscious mind has a lot of deep things happening and creates, you know, things that we experience based on either traumas or whatever. But to me it almost comes across as, what difference does it make? Either way, people are having these experiences, whether it's actually a ghost or it's their brain. This is still a real thing for people, you
Very.
know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I used to have there were two major moments. The earlier one was I used to have a sleep paralysis,
Yeah, for sure.
where you see like this demon figure or whatever, and your body can't move and you're, frozen. And it's one of the scariest, I mean, things on the planet. You can be I remember when it first started to happen to me, this was when I was young and I was like in middle school, and I would lay in my mom's bed after it happened the first time. And there's nothing scarier than seeing this like black figure out of the corner of your eye in the corner of the room, and your mom's laying next to you and you can't communicate. Like, even though your parent is right there, there's nothing you can do. It's horrifying. So when I moved back to Florida and I moved into my apartment, and it was the first time in a while I was living by myself, like just completely. Actually, no, it was the first time ever I was living completely by myself.
Okay.
And the sleep paralysis started to come back. And again, I got to the point where I was scared to go to sleep. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to address this. So what I did was I turned everything off in my apartment. I unplugged the refrigerator because it made noise. I unplugged anything that was making noise. I wanted complete silence. And I put a blanket down on the middle of the floor in the living room. And I sat down in the middle of the living room on the floor. And I said, I'm going to sit here until I am no longer uncomfortable sitting here. Like, because I was getting scared of the dark, because like it was freaking me out.
Right.
And I sat there for a while. And after a while, I started to feel a presence in the room. And I literally just spoke to it. I was like, listen, I understand you live here. I don't know like who or what you are. However, I live here. I pay bills here. And I'm not going to live in fear in my own home. So I respect that you're here, but this is also my space too. And I swear to God, I've never had sleep paralysis ever again for the rest of my life. So again, is that something in my head that I just had to address? Or is it an actual, I don't know, but I do know something happened.
Well, it's interesting. I too suffer from sleep paralysis and night terrors. As a
Mm-hmm.
40, I'm almost 42 now, and
Mm-hmm.
I have for years. And it's interesting because there's so many people that have a collective experience that's the same. They see a figure, right? They see like
Mm-hmm.
a dark figure. They feel like they're oppressed, and then your
Mm-hmm.
mind. If you grew up around any religion whatsoever, of course you say to yourself, religious, superstitious, oh my God, the devil is here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrifies
Yeah.
you. And something that I've done, like when nobody has been able to come to me, is I've prayed in my dreams and it's went away.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I just assumed like, okay, maybe it was like a spiritual attack or something. But I don't like to discredit people's, because there's so many collective, thoughts of people saying that this happens to them. They also see the Hat Man, right? Which is,
Yeah. 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 Yep. I
you know,
saw that, man.
saw the Hat Man. I've seen the Hat Man. I've been in a haunting where we've seen, and this is a wake, we've seen the shadows of a man with a cat, and I wonder what the hell is it. I do paranormal investigation also, and that can be to so many people, but I have found that most places are not haunted. Most of it you can't absolutely say. What you did was amazing. You unplugged things, you did all this stuff to see if your mind was tapping into this, and that's smart. A lot of it can be electrical, it can be a lot of different but there are some things that I absolutely cannot explain. One being I was grabbed in a house that was very haunted with my family, and I was grabbed where there was no one in the room and pulled backwards on my ankle, and that was awake. That was undeniable. So to me, I've always been chasing that feeling of what the hell was that, and how can I help people who went through the same thing. But the sleep paralysis thing is, I mean, have you had any other type of hauntings? Have you ever seen a spirit, like an outright apparition, awake?
Never seen anything. I'll tell you the other significant experience I had.
Yeah.
So I went to Senegal, like me. So my mom runs a nonprofit, and she does a lot of work in different parts of Africa. So I went with her. Me and my wife went with her, and we went to this place called Gory Island in Senegal.
Okay.
And Gory Island is an island right off the coast of Senegal, and it was one of two major slave ports on the east coast of Africa. So there's an actual, like, they call it a castle, but it's essentially a slave warehouse that is still standing, that is now like a museum sort of thing. And just so you understand why this was significant, I am a obsessed with water person. I fish, I snorkel. I'm learning how to dive now. Like, I love being in water.
Yeah.
Right. We get on the boat to go out to Gory Island, and as the island is like in view, I start to get horrified. Like, again, I've never had an uneasy. I live in Florida. I kayak with alligators. Like, it's I've never been scared of anything in water before. And I'm on a boat with probably 100 other people. It's like a ferry that takes you out there. And I was like, oh, if you go in this water, you will die.
Yeah, for sure.
There was something about that place, and what was very significant, I said, something is telling me that the sharks in this specific area are accustomed to eating people. Which, again, I don't know how you have a feeling that's that specific, but that was the feeling that I had. Now my question is it that because I'm African American and I, in the back of my mind, know that I have an ancestor that probably suffered horribly in this place, and my mind is making me have this experience? Because when I got there, we did the tour, and the weird thing was, in the slave quarters where everyone else was having these emotional experiences, I felt nothing. I was completely compelled by the water. Right. And I said, you know what? I can't allow myself to leave this. Kind of the same thing I did in my room. I said, I can't allow myself to leave this place afraid.
Right.
And I walked down to the water's edge, and I stood like, up to my ankles in water, and I washed my face with the seawater, and it instantly all went away. All of that feeling just completely vanished. Wow. So again, it's like, the theory that I have is that, for every African American who's over here, they have an ancestor who is waiting on the shoreline for you to return and visit, at least visit. Yeah. And once you do visit, you can be at peace, is what I think.
I think that's a big way of looking at it. I mean, it is interesting because it was almost like what I call the haunted house effect, right? You walk up the street to this ominous house, like in the movies, and you're like, oh my God, that place has to be haunted because it looks creepy. But I don't feel that that's what it was for you on that. Maybe you had the preconceived notion of, like you said, this sucks because this is an area where my ancestors suffered, and so many people suffered here, you know, for an awful cause, right? I mean, slavery, being uprooted from their lives and everything. That could be part of it, but I mean, it's just so interesting. It was like once you washed your face clean with the salt water, it just washed away all your fears. That's an amazing story, man. I appreciate you telling us that.
Oh, I have one more actually. Now that I think about it, when me and my mom used to live in Yonkers, New York, and we used to live in this apartment building on the river, and behind our apartment building was this like jogging trail that went like through the woods out there. This is one of the few areas in New York where there's like woods that you can go to. So we were walking out there one day, and there's this little like abandoned, like it's too much to call it even a shack. It was deteriorating into nothing, but there were still walls. The roof wasn't really there anymore. And you walked in, and it was so creepy. There was all of this like pentagram kind of stuff spray painted on the walls. Like, it was so creepy. And I was like, there's something, like, let's just go home. At the time, my mom was like, there's something just evil about this. And a couple years later, I'm watching this documentary about the Son of Sam serial killer.
Yep.
And they're like, and this is the cabin in the woods in Yonkers where he hid out for months and months, and he had murdered multiple people in this cabin. And I'm like, holy shit, that's the cabin
That's the one.
that we found in the woods and said this place is evil. So I mean, like, there's something to be said for it. Like, I've had multiple experiences in my life even where I'm like, I don't know if I'm superstitious, but something's going on.
I think about energy, man. I think I truly, when talking to all these spiritual people and all these people who, I think we live in a supernatural world, and I think we are all energy. And I think when we die, I think our energy doesn't just fizz out. I think that it's kind of like a collective of, you know, this will be a deep dive, I know, but I feel like ghosts and all this, it's all a collective of the past, present, and future all mixed together. And we're only going to know when we die. So I kind of look at it like that. That's why they'll see different like reports of where people will actually get a glimpse into the past. Like they'll look out a window and they'll see like a Victorian setting with cobblestone, and none of that's there, right?
Yeah.
So it's like whatever spirit's there is trying to share with them like what their view out the window. So I mean that's kind of my 2 cents on it. But man, I love stories like that. A shack like that, I would assume is probably like the Blair Witch shack, you know, from the project. I'm waiting for a guy in the corner standing there. But yeah, I mean, especially in New York, like you said, there's not a lot of wooded area, especially in the city, right? So you find that, and the son of Sam was such an interesting story anyway, from a guy who was deeply disturbed. You wonder if he was possessed. You wonder what it was, but man, the good thing that you and your mom got out of there safe, and all the evil spirits didn't follow you home.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to do this to you. I know your time is very important. Usually I pause in between for sponsorship, but I'm just going to add it in here, at some point. But to give you a chance now instead, since this was such a great interview with you, I'm going to let you kind of promote what you want to promote, and just tell everybody where they can get a hold of you.
Okay. Comedian Chris Robinson on Instagram is the easy one, and then Chris Robinson Comedy on Facebook. But if you guys are really interested, the Funny Style Podcast, again, on all your podcasting platforms. There's, like I said, there's 75 episodes. This Saturday, I've got Kyle Grooms, who was on the Chappelle Show and has been on Def Comedy Jam, a bunch of amazing stuff. He's coming up from Miami to do one of our shows that I produce, and he's going to do our podcast while he's in town. So definitely check out the Funny Style Podcast. And if you want to hear my actual stand-up, you can look up the 60/40 Rules. And if you look up the 60/40 Rules comedy or the 60/40 Rules Chris Robinson, it'll come right up.
Man, awesome, man. Chris, you've been an awesome guest. I'd love to have you
Thank
back
you, man.
time. And we can get weird whenever you want. You can if you have a ghost experience, just get a hold of me, all right? But thank you for being on the show. You're a great guest, and
thank you, man.
The other side, man.
All right. Thanks, man.